Hi everyone, welcome to Things Lucy Reads. I'm Luce and this is my December wrap up. So in the month of December I read 10 books and I'm just going to start with the two that I can't show you because I read them digitally. The first one was A Matter of Disagreement by E.E. Ottoman, which I ended up only rating a 2-star. This was just a little novella which I read for the Queer Lit Readathon, and it was about this scientist who meets up with this man who he immediately feels an attraction to until he finds out that this man is his scientific rival, and then they have to kind of come to a better understanding of each other's ideas and who each other is as a person before they can then act on their attraction. The love interest was trans. That was Own Voices representation, fortunately, and this was also a problem with the last E.E. Ottoman book that I read as well. The copy editing was terrible. Like not only like missing commas and typos, but there were instances where the wrong word was used. I can't think of any examples, but instead of using like the word that actually makes sense in the context of the sentence, what was used instead was a word that sounded the same, but it wasn't the right one. And I didn't flag any examples of this to prove my point, but that happened a lot. And also the thing that was the deal breaker for me was the bedroom talk was horrific. Like, so the love interest was trans and there was some kind of a transition happening there by way of, I think it was like steampunk plus also magic. So, you know, there were elements of transition that were possible. So he had a cock and the main character in bed referred to the love interest's penis as something like mighty weapon or something manhood, and like the other one like lost it, like started laughing and then thought it was adorable that this grown-ass man would rather use over-the-top, florid, embarrassing language because he didn't like the word cock because it was too boring or whatever. It's a no from me. I have at least one other E.E. Ottoman book and I'm gonna give it a chance because I've paid for it, but I feel like I'm gonna have a similar problem with all of his books in that I'm gonna hate the bedroom talk and no one's copy edited it properly. So this one was 2 stars. It was fine. Bedroom talk was like, I sustained psychic damage from having to read that nonsense. So I don't recommend this one, unfortunately. The next book that I'm going to talk about that I also read digitally was Rick by Alex Gino, and I listened to the audiobook of this on Scribd. I gave this one 4 stars. It was really, really good. Melissa from Alex Gino's previous book showed up in it and I really liked it. I just thought that it was slightly less satisfying than Melissa was, because by the end of that book, everyone kind of takes Melissa seriously when she says she's a girl and they believe her, and you know, she's allowed to live that truth. And Rick is asexual, and I never really felt like we got past all the adults in his life thinking that he wasn't old enough to know, or that he'd be able to make up his mind when he was older. And I just didn't feel like Rick was given the same amount of space and validation to be who he was as Melissa was. So like, this is just like, your mileage may vary, you may feel about it differently than I did. So it was just that I never really felt like the adults in his life were really rooting for him in this aspect of his life. I think they all thought, oh well, this is just who you are right now, but you don't have to decide, bud, you've got plenty of time. Like, maybe don't do that. Anyway, I really loved Rick's relationship with his grandfather. That was easily my favorite part of the book, and it was just really sweet. They bond over their love of this sci-fi show, and Rick finds out that his grandfather used to cosplay, in an unexpected sort of way. I won't spoil it for you, but it was really lovely and I really adored it, and I hope to pick up a physical copy of it at some point as well. But the audiobook was also really good, and it is narrated by Alex Gino themselves, so it was fantastic and I really recommend that one. And now we're on to the, oh, what was that? That's my goose impression. Now we're on to the books that I read in a physical format, and the first one was also a book for the Queer Lit Readathon. Rick was as well, and that is Cheer Up, Love and Pom Poms by Crystal Frazier. I've done it again. Pom Poms. So hard to say that word. You wouldn't think it is, but it is. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. So this follows 2 characters. The first one is Annie, and she is a lesbian who is kind of antisocial. She gets in trouble at school, and in order to make up for what she's done, she tries out for the cheerleading team because her mum was on the cheerleading team and it was like the best experience of her life, and she really enjoyed it, and she thinks that Annie's going to enjoy it too. Annie is very, very hesitant to begin with. And the other problem is that also on the cheer team is Bibi, who is Annie's ex-friend. And so they have to kind of go through this friendship breakup baggage, and Annie's, you know, the trouble she's having with socializing, and kind of meet each other where they are currently in their lives. And it was just so lovely. There's a little bit of romance happening in here. They go to prom. Annie turns out to really love cheer, and she gets on well with everyone on the team after a little bit of a rocky start. And throughout the book, they all learn how to stand up for themselves and to also stand up for each other, and especially in Bibi's case because she's trans. And I docked half a star because her parents are supportive of her transition, but only conditionally. Like, she has to maintain a grade point average and balance her friends and balance her cheer and kind of do all of that in order to be allowed to transition. And I just felt some kind of way about that, and I felt like it wasn't fair that she had it held over her head that she would lose the privilege of transitioning if she like got a low mark at school. That just seems cruel. And like, otherwise her parents were great, really supportive, but it was just this one thing that their acceptance of her transition was conditional. And there was a few moments at the end where they mention that she's happier than she's ever been, and you know, she starts kind of advocating for herself more and telling them that she wants to do things the way she wants to do them and not the way they want her to do them. So that was good, and I feel like in the future in this story they would kind of move together to have a little less of a toxic relationship. But as it is in the story, it is just a little bit toxic, and it's not a heavy or a dark book. It's very lighthearted and it's very sweet, but I just want you to be aware that her parents are like this so that you can be prepared going and reading it, because I think if you were unprepared and it mirrored your own situation, you might find it difficult to read. So just be aware that it is like that. But overall, it was really good. I loved the times when Bibi kind of called people around her out for not doing the things that she wanted them to do for her, but for doing the things that made them feel better. And I thought that it was really good that she kind of stood up for herself in that regard. And I did really enjoy it overall. It packs a lot into a very short book, but it was really, really good and I really enjoyed it. And I would recommend this one, but just be aware of Bibi's family situation. The next book that I read, I was going to read for the Queer Lit Readathon, and then I read it and I realized it's not actually queer. It's shelved as queer on Goodreads, and I think that's just an assumption made because Wendy Xu's previous book was Mooncakes, which is queer, but this one is not outwardly queer at all. Anyway, it's Tide Song. This is about this little girl who is not great at magic, but she comes from a magical family and she wants to attend this magical academy, but in order to study for her exams and to kind of improve her magical skills, she goes to stay with her grandmother's sister to learn the family magic. And shenanigans ensue. She ends up befriending this sea dragon, and there's some like sea dragon politics happening, which was really fascinating, and they kind of have to fix everything and save the world and find themselves along the way. And it was very cute. It's compared a lot to Ghibli films, very much deserved. It's definitely that kind of vibe, and also very much that kind of like aesthetic as well. Like, it is just very reminiscent of, you know, Ponyo and Kiki and Totoro and sweet, fantastical but ultimately domestic Ghibli movies. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Tremendous friendships. I'm definitely going to revisit it in the future. It was just a really nice, lovely time, and everyone experienced character growth, not just the children but also the adults in the way that they relate to the children and the way they treat their children, because the only way they know how to do it is to mirror the way that they were treated, but everyone gets past it, and it was just wonderful, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would recommend it, but please know that it's not queer. I didn't notice anything, and you know, I'm usually pretty sharp with these things. So, and then the next book that I read was it also for the Queer Lit Readathon? I don't remember. It was my book for seasonal vibes, and that was Seaside Stranger Volume 1 by Kikana. This I only gave 3 stars to. This is part of a reading vlog also, which will be uploaded soon-ish, and I will go into more depth about my feelings there. But ultimately the problems I had with this was that the characters were bad at communicating, not only with each other but also with you, the reader. Like, I have no idea what's actually going on inside these characters' heads, because it is never told to us in any way, shape or form. Like, I genuinely have no idea how they feel about the other one truly, or you know, how they feel about the relationship, or what they want out of the relationship or out of their lives in general. Part of that is probably just because this is the first volume and we haven't had much time to get to know them, but they flat out don't communicate with each other, and you don't even get their internal narration about it at all. So there's that. And also I don't know how old the main character is, but I thought that there was maybe like 3 or 4 years between them, and that still could be the case. At the beginning of the book, the love interest is about, I feel like at the youngest he's 16, but he's not 18 yet, because he ends up going to like a group home. His mother dies and he's left as an orphan, and he ends up going to live in this group home. So obviously he's still a minor, and the other one is old enough to have nearly been married. So like it's potentially not a huge age gap. It's probably 5 years at the most, but I was expecting it to be much smaller, and that kind of threw me for a 6, especially because when they meet, one of them is an adult and the other one is still in high school, and I just feel a little type of way about it. I'm not against age gaps. I am against age gaps when one of them is still in high school. And so I only gave this volume 3 stars. I am open to reading the rest of the series, and I will pick it up when it comes out, but I'm still very much on the fence about it. But I'm cautiously hopeful, because I felt this way about the first volume of Bloom Into You, and then when I read the whole series I ended up adoring it. So we'll just see how it goes. The next book that I read is volume 1 of Lore Olympus by Rachel Smythe, which is a retelling of all Hades and Persephone, except they live in modern times. And I gave this 4 stars. It was really wonderful. I do want to make it clear that there is both non-consensual drug use. I would refer to it as someone gives Persephone a date rape drug, except they don't then rape her. They just put her in the back of Hades' car in order to play a joke on Hades, because Aphrodite is Aphrodite and she's very vengeful, and this is exactly the kind of shit that she does in mythology. She just gets offended because someone has said someone looks prettier than her, and she wants to get back at them. So that's what happened. But she was drugged by Apollo and Aphrodite and then put in the back of Hades' car, which is how they met, and it ended up being like really nice, and like they instantly got on very well. It was just the way by which they were introduced to each other. It was like their meet cute. And then also later on there is a scene where at a party or like a little get together, Persephone is coerced into having sex with someone. She doesn't really want to do it, but she goes along with it anyway. So I would class that as being sexual assault. It is assault, that is rape. She wasn't really consenting, but it wasn't like he violently attacked her and held her down. He just convinced her to do something that he didn't want to do, which doesn't make it better. I just want you to be aware of what exactly the kind of situation is that Persephone gets into. I usually hate reading about any kind of sexual assault and I actively avoid it where I can, but I didn't have a very visceral reaction to anything that happened in this book. It was, as these things go, pretty mild. Obviously, again, mileage will vary, but it was okay for me. Hades is a little bit of a disaster. He's just so easily flustered and like so sweet and like really wants to have like a friendship with Persephone but isn't quite sure how to go about it necessarily. One of my favorite parts of this was when Persephone was in Hades's house and she met all of his dogs, including Cerberus, and it looked like Cerberus was going to attack her and Hades kind of came right up behind her to like protect her, and she was like, no, it's okay, I've got this. Let me find the page for you. Hilarious. So she's like, don't worry, I know what I'm doing. And then essentially just, I don't know if you can see, but just like starts scratching him under the chin. And of course, Cerberus, being a dog, fucking loves it. Maybe it's not Cerberus because it doesn't have 3 heads. It's one of the dogs anyway. Ultimately, it was a really enjoyable, really fun time. Be aware that there is the assault and the drugs, but other than that, I quite enjoyed it and I'm very excited for the second one to come out. The next book that I read is 100 Ghosts by Doogie Horner, which is just a little book about all different kinds of ghosts. This one is quite possibly my favorite. It's a ghost after a bath hanging on a clothesline, and it's just 100 of these kind of illustrations. Some of them were a little bit questionable, so I only gave this 4 stars, but ultimately it was a fun 5 minutes and I got a bit of a giggle out of it and it cheered me up, which is all I really wanted for it to do. So I achieved one of the goals that I set out for myself for last year, and that was to read Blood of Elves by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is part of the Witcher series. It's the first full-length novel, but chronologically it comes second after The Last Wish, which is a book of short stories. I had read that before I watched the first season of The Witcher, and I wanted to continue that streak and to read this before I watched the second season of The Witcher, so I did that. I gave this 4 stars. It was pretty good. Sapkowski is really good at like writing dialogue. Like, there were a lot of times where the action was only implied, like he didn't tell you anything about it at all except for what the characters were saying to each other, and like there would be whole scenes that would be just dialogue, but it worked. So it's a fairly thick book, but I tore through it in about 3 days. And I have since watched the second season of the show. I am so glad that they did not follow Triss's storyline from the book like to the letter, because she actually spends most of this book with like gastro, or which is called stomach flu if you don't live in Australia. So it's unfortunately a pretty embarrassing time for her, and obviously in the show that doesn't happen, so I was very glad about that, because that was a little bit too much of an indignity for poor Triss. Like, she did not deserve it. In case you are unaware, Triss is bisexual. It is made clear in this book. Obviously that word is never used, but it is made clear in this book that she is bisexual, which is great because I love her. It was really interesting to see what the showrunners did with what happened in this book, and there's parts in it that I think were actually in Sword of Destiny, which I didn't pick up on at the time. Like, I have also read that one, but a lot of it just had no context for me. So I'm keen to go back and read certain parts of that, because I know there's a story where Geralt meets Istrid, and I remembered that it happened, but I only remembered the parts of it where they talked about Yennefer. So I'm really interested to go back and read that, and to also see if any of the other stories in that collection contain the events that happen in the second season, because there's a lot in there that isn't in this one, and I think it's happening here. It's just happening in the background and you don't necessarily know about it. It's ultimately a faithful adaptation, except that a lot of what you find out in the show you don't find out in this book. The next book that I read is Hither Page by Cat Sebastian. I'm also going to talk about this in a reading vlog as well. This is a murder mystery slash gay romance set following World War II in this sleepy little English village where a murder takes place, and Leo Page goes there. He's a spy and his job is to kind of solve the murder so his superiors can cover it up, because there are like bigger things at play and he needs to figure out how it fits into those and protect the reputation of his boss. And while he's there, he meets the village doctor, who is an ex-army doctor who's a little bit shell-shocked, and they realize that they have met each other in a field hospital in France already under different names. So their developing relationship is happening alongside the solving of the murder, and it was a really enjoyable time. I gave this 4 stars. They're not the only gays in the book, which was exciting, but unfortunately my brain has been doing this thing pretty much all year. It's like lowered cognitive ability. I feel like I've said so many times in wrap-ups for this year that I just don't grasp everything that's happening in books all the time, and it depends on like the context of when I'm reading them. And like this one I ultimately ended up buying as an ebook because my brain was also doing the thing where it wouldn't let me sit down and hold a book open, but it would let me read for hours on my phone, so I just went with it. But I was reading it late at night when I was typically really tired, so a lot of it I think just went over my head and I didn't really kind of grasp all of the threads of the mystery. And I feel like if I read it again, maybe when we're not in the middle of a panini, I'll have a little bit of a better time with it. But it's not bad, and I have pre-ordered the second one, which comes out in 2 weeks, and I am very excited to get to know these characters some more. It's nothing to do with the writing or the book. I don't think that it was too complex. I think it was just that my brain, like probably everyone's, is just struggling at the moment, and I just have to work with it as best as I can. And the last book that I finished off in the month of December 2021 is Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. I read this partially as an audiobook on Scribd and also partially in this paper book. I have absolutely no idea how to talk about this. So it follows this girl called Ada, who is also the embodiment of several gods. We meet a couple of them, but mostly they narrate the story as a collective, and they are her, and they are in her, and they are part of her, but they are also very much distinct from her. And throughout the book, Ada experiences a lot of things which would be very easy for me to sit here and pathologize for you and just say, okay, it's this, this, and this, except it's not those things. She has several gods in her head, and that's what those things are. The content warnings for this are for rape, suicidal ideation, self-harm, probably several other things. I will link my Goodreads review down below. I think I had a more comprehensive list there. But even those things are dealt with in a kind of detached way. Like, they happen to Ada, but they also don't happen to Ada. And this is the kind of book where I could sit here and tell you many things about it, and none of it will actually make sense until you read this book. And I feel like it's also better to just also not know a lot about it before you go into it. Like, it is mostly fiction, but there are aspects of Akwaeke's own life in this book as well, and their recent memoir, Dear Centauran, is probably going to make it clear what parts of this book are factual and what part of it is fiction. But a lot of it, I know, is rooted in Akwaeke's own experience of the world and their self, and it was just really fascinating. And like with Vivek Oji and like with Pet, like, heavy shit goes down, but they're not heavy to read. And I think it takes a tremendous amount of skill to be able to do that, to be able to be so light-handed that you can deal with things like rampant transphobia and the threat of murder and the threat of death and rape and suicide, and to do it in a way that doesn't leave your readers feeling bogged down in everything that your characters are slogging through. Like, the characters are slogging through it, but your readers are not. And I've said this many times as well, but I think that Akwaeke Emezi is the literary powerhouse of this age, and I feel so tremendously blessed to be sharing the planet with them. Definitely read this book. It's unlike anything I've ever read, but it was just so good, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely read this book and experience it for yourself. If you think that you can handle it, definitely do that, because I think it's very worth it, and I really liked it. So yeah, so those were all the books that I read in the month of December. If you've read any of them and you would like to let me know what you've thought, please feel free to do that down below. Leave me any emoji that you feel like in the comments, and I will know that you were here, and also it will help me out with the algorithm. Like I feel like we all know that that's going to happen, but please know that I also know that that's going to happen. So, but yeah, do that if you want, and thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye for now.